All right, 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to assume everyone can hear me and see me okay. I did an audio check and a video check, and everything looked good. So, again, if you're having any issues, feel free to put it out there in the chat. I actually I sort of mentioned that in the chat already, so I will be keeping my eye on that. So, welcome. This is my talk, Build Your First SharePoint Client-Side Web Part with the SharePoint Framework. My name is David E. Patrick. This is Philly.net Code Camp Spring 2021. Wow, I can't believe it's 2021. Our first virtual. Bill Wolf's been doing this for 30 years, and this is our first virtual edition. So we've come into the modern times now, by hook or by crook. And here we are. So we're excited to do the first virtual edition. Though I am missing the bagels and the lunch, so maybe we'll have to figure a way to get those virtually somehow. Again, my name is Dave Patrick. I work for a company called Data Systems Analyst, otherwise known as DSA. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, solution developer, solution expert. I take a lot of Microsoft exams. If anyone's interested in Microsoft certification, hit me up. Tweet me at David E. Patrick on Twitter. Shoot me an email at davidepatrick@madsharepoint.com. That's my user group. I've got so many certifications. One of my certifications, this is a funny one, is I'm MCP dead. So that stands for Microsoft Certified Professional Developer, Enterprise Application Developer. I swear someone at Microsoft saw all the certifications or exams I had been taking. I've taken over 100. And I've passed, a lot too. Not all of them. But they came out with this certification to make fun of me, MCP dead. But I wear it loud and proud. Been using SharePoint since it first came out in beta, the Tahoe edition. I'm an IT customer lead trainer. My actual title is SME, subject matter expert. It means I do everything. I train, I do administration, I do development, both with SharePoint and SQL, ASP.NET. I work for the U.S. Army or DoD contractor at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and I run a bunch of different user groups. The one that I like to highlight is Mad SharePoint right there at the bottom, madsharepoint.com. We've been having hybrid meetings for the last couple of years. Now we're all virtual due to the pandemic. So anyone from anywhere in the world can attend our monthly meetings just by going to Mad SharePoint, and it's just like we're doing here. We run them via Microsoft Teams. Again, if anyone's interested coming to work if you're a U.S. citizen and want to come to work for DSA, we've got jobs all over the United States, including Hawaii, which is a big favorite of mine. They've been around forever, since 1963, and they do everything from collaboration and knowledge management, aka SharePoint, to cybersecurity, identity management solutions, network engineering, systems integration, and systems engineering and technical assistance. They do it all. So if you're looking or you know someone who's looking, please let me know. I'd love to refer them. I'd love to get them. It's actually I started there about 10 years ago, and I thought I'd be there for 6 months. And just recently, I signed up for the 401k because after about 10 years, I figured, I guess I'm going to be here a while. I love it so much. It's a lot of energy. Unlike what you might think, where government and behind the times and all that, we're using all the good stuff. We're working on moving to Office 365. We're working on a migration to SharePoint 2019. So we are not behind the times by any means. I mentioned my Mad SharePoint user group. So this is from the my website on Meetup. We're big into swag stuff. We all get free stuff. So when we met face to face, I had all these prizes to hand out. Now I'm mailing them to people when we run different user group meetings. We have different raffles and whatnot. We've got some digital prizes that we gave out at our last user group meeting. We gave out some codes to Pluralsight to get a free month of Pluralsight. So we're still keeping it. We're figuring out how to do it in the virtual world. We're still keeping it with the free stuff and having fun, fast, and free. That's the motto of our user group. Let's see what else we got here. So what do I want you to take away from today's session? We got a little less than an hour, about 15 minutes or so. I want you to know what is a web part in SharePoint. How can I build one? Go through the steps. I'm a big hands-on person. And then how do you get it out there onto Office 365? How do you deploy it? So we're going to walk through, if nothing else, if you walk away with those three things, we'll call it success. So a little history of SharePoint. It's been around forever. This is the wheel of functionality of SharePoint. You can build sites. You can do Facebook-like communities. There's liking and all that stuff didn't really take off. They sort of replaced that, not replaced it, but they came up with Yammer, and people use Yammer. And now with Teams, there's a little bit of a overlap of functionality. There's Yammer for the public, there's Teams for inside. So the community sites in SharePoint have kind of not been as hot, even though I do use them with my customers. Content approval, getting documents up there, versioning, all that. Search, they got some really good search now. Ever since 2010, bought that fast technology. It's one capability. The funny thing with search gets a knock in SharePoint. because it got to be, you have to configure. It's like garbage in, garbage out. If you don't configure search and spend time on search and get it working properly, which Google does. I mean, look at Google. Everyone loves Google. Everyone compares SharePoint search to Google search, but SharePoint search can be as good as Google search if you give it the love, care, and feeding that Google does their search. So don't discount that. That's still a real cool feature in SharePoint. Business intelligence, otherwise known as insights. So there's a lot now with Power BI. You can do a lot with fancy reports. And combination with SharePoint. And then this is one of my favorites, composites. That's the idea of no code, low code. We've been talking about that since SharePoint 2007, but now it's really coming to its own with Power Apps and Power BI and Flow, and Microsoft Power Automate. So people are really, really coming on board now with how can I build these solutions without having to write too much code, no code or low code solutions. And SharePoint is the perfect tool to be a part of that. Now, traditionally, when SharePoint developers, when .NET developers would come to me and say, hey, I want to get into SharePoint development, we talked about some of the different things you had to learn, the different tools, Visual Studio, the different platforms, SharePoint Object Model, different ways to deploy. The landscape was pretty rich even back in the day. So you had things like business collaboration, tying SharePoint to, say, maybe Microsoft Dynamics or some other business application that they want to work with. You had to know .NET and ASP.NET. You had to learn a little bit about the server-side object model, line of business application data, different customized SharePoint server workflows. On top of that, you had to know about REST APIs for integrating with other websites, the client object model, list data for the farm, the site, the server object model, link, language integrated query. So there was a lot. These are older slides. There was a lot when you first got started with SharePoint back in the 2000 and 2010 timeframe. Nowadays, it's different. I want to say it's less complex. I'm not sure if that's true, but there's a different set of technologies. When I hire, and I hire a lot of developers, I'm constantly interviewing developers, and I'm asking about the skills that they're going to need to be successful as a SharePoint developer. And I use developer in quotes because some people think developer means coder, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Unless, I mean, HTML is a language, right? Hypertext markup language. The L stands for language, so that is code. Cascading style sheets is code. It's not traditional compiled code, but it still is code. So there still is code. JavaScript, jQuery, all those JavaScript libraries, SPS services, still are very, very important to know. And that's what people today tend to have to learn. And I focus less on the previous stuff that I just mentioned. On top of that, you can use these languages in 2013 to create what we used to call for a hot second apps. And then Microsoft said, everything's an app. Let's not call it an app. Let's call it an add-in. So there's been a bit of a, this is all to say there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of, well, not confusion. I mean, there has been a confusion, but it's been a result of the fact that we've had all these different object or the development models for different versions of SharePoint. In 2007, you had code running from the global assembly cache. It was lived right in IIS, Internet Information Server. Then you had, in 2010, Microsoft introduced this idea of a sandbox because the problem with 2007 code was that it could crash the whole server. So a sandbox was supposed to encapsulate your code and prevent that from happening. Then in 2013, we said, well, we still have some security issues with code being on the server, so let's get it off the server with this idea of an app, and we'll run it outside. But then there was a lot of code that was involved in getting that code to properly authenticate and work with SharePoint. So, if you suffered through this like I have, you're a little worn, torn, and you're like, yet another development. But yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the latest SharePoint development, the SharePoint Framework, the one ring to rule them all, the one development model to rule them all. Hopefully, this will be the last one, or this, we'll spend some time with this one, we hope. But this takes some of the goodness that we learned along the way, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, and utilizes that to do this new development method that still has the benefits of not being on the server, so we're not going to crash the server, but being a little more easy to access resources from the server. And improves on some of the issues that you had with the previous development models. So what are some of the pros of the SharePoint framework or the SPFX? Runs as the current user. So if I'm already logged in, I'm running my a certain website, it runs as me. No real trickery needed to elevate my permissions or anything like that. Uses the normal HTML document object model, if you're already familiar with that. So now people that are already familiar with web development are very comfortable with the document object model. It's responsive and accessible by default. This is a big deal. So now we're doing web parts. The reason we switched to this SharePoint framework is now we're creating web parts that can respond to the different formats that they're running on. If they're running on an iPad or an iPhone or a tablet or a laptop or a big monitor or a small monitor, the SharePoint framework is by default responsive. It can handle those different form factors. Accessible means 508 compliance, right? Which a lot of times we need to make sure that the images all have text behind them, and they're accessible to screen readers for people that are blind or deaf or whatever the disabilities they have. And I had the pleasure of, I teach over at the University of Maryland, and I've had students with these disabilities. So it's helpful to understand their challenges. And now when I'm writing code, I'm cognizant of how do I need to make my code both not only responsive, but also accessible for those with those challenges. And the framework helps us do that. You also get access to all the typical events, lifecycle, form load, and all that. Not official, so the SharePoint framework is not officially tied to a specific framework. You don't have to know React or Angular or whatever JavaScript library happens to be the most popular one lately. You can use any of them if you want. So there's that flexibility. And then the tools that you need to, and we're going to go through all these, to create a SharePoint framework web part are common open source tools. So NPM, TypeScript, Yeoman, Webpack, Gulp. These, they're out there. You can get the source to them very easily accessible. Let's talk about some of the cons of the SharePoint framework. And what you might notice if you don't blink is that a lot of the pros I relist as cons, and I'll tell you why. So number one, runs as the current user. Well, I can't elevate my permissions very easily with the SharePoint framework. So that's a little bit of a challenge. How do I, if I need, just this one operation, I need to be able to write to a library that I wouldn't normally read to write to. That's not as straightforward, it's not as easy as I used to do with my old server-side based code. It uses the normal document object model, so I'm limited to the things that the document object model limits me to. I mean, they do that for security purposes, so it's a good thing, but also it is a restriction, and now I have to work within those confines. Not officially tied to a specific framework. Again, while this is a benefit, meaning I can choose whatever I want, it also gives me that, sometimes they say that freedom is choice is a horrible thing, because now I've got to make a decision. Do I go with React? Do I go with Angular? Do I go with Knockout? Do I go with something else? I'm responsible as the architect, as the solution developer. I got to figure out which one of those. And sometimes you make, a decision that maybe you get down the road and go, maybe I should have went this other, the other way. If they had simply just picked one and told us this is what we're doing, that decision would be made for you by someone else, which sometimes is a good thing. The tools are common open source. When I said that was a good thing, it's also a con in the sense that, well, I'm a traditional Microsoft.NET developer, so I don't know NPM, or I didn't know NPM or TypeScript or Yeoman or Webpack model. They were all brand new to me when this first came out, and so it was a whole big learning curve for those traditional Microsoft developers that we had to scale. We had to say, okay, now we learn all these common open source tools. Great for people that already know them, but for folks like me that was programming in .NET in 2007, this is was a whole new ball of wax I had to ingest, and that's what I put down at the bottom. We had to learn all new stuff almost. So a little shout out to some of the old tools that are out there. SharePoint Designer, I know it's deprecated, going away. I'm still using it both for my 2013 clients, my 2016 clients, and my 2019 clients. So even though people keep saying, it's not there anymore, I still have to use it to do my workflows mainly. So, if you were familiar, if you're wondering how that still fits in the new world, the SharePoint framework world, it doesn't. It has been sort of, pushed in the corner. But I still tell my new developers to get familiar with it, because we're still supporting, unless you're completely online, and even online, you can still use it to do 2013 workflow. Or I'm sorry, 2013 workflows. I know they deprecated and they recently pulled support for 2010 workflows online, but the 2013 workflows are still there online. So there still is a need for the SharePoint Designer. Visual Studio, in the old days, I would use the Visual Studio, tool proper, the main integrated development environment to do the web part designers and stuff like that. Now it's Visual Studio Code, right? And that's the lightweight text editor that's great for editing CSS, JavaScript, HTML. So this gives you the idea of the old tools versus the new tools. In the old days, we had the .NET Framework. Now we have Node.js for SharePoint Framework. In the old days, we had NuGet. Now we had NPM. Previously, I knew C#. Now I'm using TypeScript, which is, it's a formalized version of it compiles down to JavaScript, but with TypeScript gives you that type safety that C# gave you. So you actually have, data types and things like that. Visual Studio was our old integrated development environment. Now we're using whatever VS Code or whatever your favorite. I guess you can use Sublime. I'm a big fan of VS Code. MS Build, and then you've got these other ones like Gulp and Webpack, and that's the Visual Studio Code there. But all these other open source tools, we're going to touch on all these and show you how easy it is to get started with them. The first time I saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much more new stuff to learn. But there's a great tutorial that we're going to walk through that introduces you to all of this and kind of takes some of the fear and uncertainty away from us. I mentioned before, old school SharePoint developer. I used to, there was a time where they had, hey, set up a development environment on your Windows 7 or your Vista or your Windows 10 machine and put all your tools on your local box. Well, now we have the cloud. Now we have virtual machines. I find it much easier to create a virtual machine and set up my visual development environment there. That way I can have multiple virtual machines with different versions. It's in the cloud. It's accessible from any laptop or any desktop I'm at. I'm a big fan as a SharePoint developer of leveraging Azure to run my dev machines, to run my SharePoint farms if I need an on-premise farm in Azure, and also to help me with Office 365. So if you haven't started working with Azure yet as a SharePoint developer, this is why you should. And I gave a talk earlier, Intro to Azure for SharePoint developers. It looks like some of you were in that. You should definitely look into getting started with Azure. It has, as I mentioned, SharePoint farms, which I talked about in my last talk, but even just creating a virtual machine and setting up your development environment, which is what I've done for today's demo, is a real good thing. I should mention, I used to have a whole other talk on using Docker for development of SharePoint. And the nice thing about Docker, and I've got some links embedded in my slides if you want more information, is it's basically a mini virtual machine. And you can do what I just described. You can set up a Docker image file and install different versions of the SharePoint framework if you're targeting a certain version. And then that way you have these virtual machines. The nice thing is these can all be sitting on if you got a really powerful laptop, they could be sitting down, off the cloud, and you can just fire up different versions of virtual machines running on your desktop. You can also run Docker in the cloud if you don't want to run it on your laptop. So it's another opportunity. Again, a whole nother talk on this if you're interested. There's lots of details and there's a lot of good information in this YouTube video that I've linked here if you want more information about how to use Docker. But I'm about using a virtual machine in Azure. So we're going to walk through how to get started, how to create the virtual machine, get it set up, and build a Hello World web part. Remember, we said 3 things we want to do. What is a web part? How to build one, and how to deploy it, and that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we want to talk about is setting up your environment. And again, you could use your physical machine. I prefer a virtual machine, or you could use Docker. I'm going to demo how to use a virtual machine and get it set up. And then once we get that virtual machine fired up, we're going to install our requirements: Node.js, Yeoman and Gulp, the Yeoman SharePoint generator. And then there's a last step where we have to create a self-signed developer cert because a lot of our developing and testing uses HTTPS. So these steps come from this article here. Let me back up and show you this. I'm going to bring this up. Microsoft has this site. And again, if you attended my previous class, Microsoft Learn has just so much great. It's way more than just documentation. It's great tutorials, walkthroughs, sandboxes. And this particular one, it walks us through how to build our first client-side web part. And the very first thing it tells us is that we need to set up our development environment. So let's look at that. To set up our development environment, the first thing it tells us is we need to create a Microsoft 365 tenant. And the way it tells you to do that is to go in there and join the Microsoft 365 developer program. I mentioned this in my last talk. This is a fabulous program. When you get started with this, you get a Microsoft 365 25 user I think it's let me sign into mine and I'll tell you what it is. So let's use my Mad SharePoint account. This is the one I use for my it's a developer tenant, so I'm using a nonprofit account to log into it. So my password is I appreciate that to keep me secure. And let's see if I can get this update. Nothing like updating your password in the middle of a demo. Alrighty, that worked. I remembered my password. Yay. And then it tells me it can't sign me in with that account. I think it's lying to me. Let's just refresh and see if that's true or not. All right. So if I had signed in, basically it would give me that information. Let's see, I'll do a little incognito window, and then we'll sign into another one. I've got multiple of these accounts. So let's go here and get that, paste that there. But the idea is that when you sign into this account, this again. There we go. Oh, all right. So maybe I do have a problem. Try it one more time here. When in doubt, try again, right? Yeah, that's the one I tried earlier. Let's try a different one. Let's try that one. So when you log into this account, it tells you, look, this is your Microsoft 365 developer account. I've got a renewable E5 subscription, expires at the end of March. This is an older one. The newer ones will every 90 days get renewed. This one I signed up a while ago when it was 120 days. But you can see I got 25 user licenses. And what's really cool about these developer accounts is that you can load sample data. So it doesn't have to be a blank account. I hate that sort of, whenever you're trying to do development, you got to make up dummy data. In this example, you can add dummy users, dummy mail, dummy events, dummy data in your SharePoint site, which is really helpful for demos and training. So question is the dev tenant always public cloud, or can you have it in the GCC? That's a good question. I don't know, and I'm in the GCC. I think it's only public, but I'm going to take that as homework and get back to you. So if you want to tweet this question to me so I can make sure I give an answer back to you, that would be good, or shoot me an email. I need to know that. I work at GCC, so I want to know that myself. I'm going to find out. The ones I've done in the past have always been public, just because it's been easy to do that. But I should say that I did have a trial account, a trial Azure account, and a trial Office 365 account in GCC, but that was different than this developer one. So now you got me thinking. That's a great question. I'm going to investigate that. All right. So once you get set up with your developer account, you can get started where we're at. Back to our steps here. So we'll minimize that for a second. We set up our tenant. So you sign up for that account. Then you want to go to your virtual machine and install Node.js. And this is a little tricky here. So let me show you how I created my virtual machine. So I'll go out to portal.azure.com, and I've already signed in. You can use a 30-day $200 credit. You can do a free virtual machine that doesn't use any of your credit. So let's do this account here. And what I'm going to do is access I've got all sorts of virtual machines. If I didn't have one, I'd go create a new resource. I'd say I want to create, a Windows server. That one works. And then I would just give it all there's a little template. If you missed my last class, I'll do my last class in 5 seconds here. You fill out all this information and you say create, and it creates a virtual machine that you can then remote desktop into. So I've done this already. My virtual machine is called Spfx dev. So I can find it in there. I've got a couple of them. See the virtual machine. So I just go there and then I click on connect and then remote desktop into it. And I've already done that. So it's sitting over here connected. Where is it? There it is. There's my SP dev machine. You can see I was playing with web parts earlier. Once I'm in my virtual machine, and you can tell it's in my virtual machine because I've got that little, I can make it smaller here. It makes it a little easier to notice. But when it's full screen, you've got the little bar up at the top here, right? I can't zoom into it because it's full screen. But if I do it here, right around the top here is where I'll have a little bar when this is full screen. There it is. Hopefully you guys can see that. So be careful, because sometimes I'll have trouble. Sometimes I'll open up a command prompt, and then I'll have one open on my desktop, and I'll wonder why something's not working. It's because I forgot I'm not in my virtual machine. So working with virtual machines 99% of the time is wonderful. It's great. If my laptop dies, my battery dies, no big deal. I grab a different one and I log back into my virtual machine. I don't lose any of my work. It's in the cloud. It's got all that great cloud redundancy and backup and all that. And I am paying a little bit in my credits, but I generally I get $150 in credits. So in my portal here, if I look at my subscription, you'll see that I rarely run out of my credit. And even if I do, it just puts a cap. I never actually pay any money. It just shuts down my machines until the 30 days is up and my credit renews. But you can actually see how much credit you're using on a virtual machine here when you click on your subscriptions. So let's see down here. It says, oh, where is it? Metrics, subscriptions down here somewhere. I'm blind at the moment. Subscriptions. There we go. You know, I got to go home to see subscriptions, duh. So, but yeah, there we are. There's our cost management. It would list all our different subscriptions and how much they all are. So in this particular one, you can see how much, you know, if you're about to run out of credit. I shut my machines down every night. I actually have them auto shut down, so that helps keeps me on my, you know, using my credit. If you leave them on all the time, I probably would run out of them, but there, yeah, I got to select, you know, a certain subscription, and then I could actually see different resource groups and get a cost analysis for all the resources, all the virtual machines, and other things in that resource group. You know, manage my credit that way. If I didn't have a trial account, this would just be money that actually, you know, got charged on my credit card. So this one looks like it's not using much money at all. Anyway, so once you're in your virtual machine, that's when you're going to start taking advantage of, you know, the tutorial that walks you through in setting your virtual machine up. So let's go in here and walk through the tutorial. So the first set, we did the Microsoft 365 tenant. I kind of glossed over that. The next step is to load Node.js. Notice it says version 10, so be careful. You know, don't install the latest version. If you just go to Node.js and open up whatever it chooses there. Let me get this out of the way a little bit. Over there we go. So if you open up this and say, oh, let me download this, and I've made this mistake. The latest version does not support, the SharePoint Framework does not support the latest version. When you do and you install this version, and then you go and you try to do a SharePoint web part, you're going to get pretty far down the line. I've done it, and then it says something like can't find web build or something. So there's some weird, you know, heaven forbid the error message says you've got the wrong version of Node.js. No, it wouldn't tell you that. But instead, it gives you some other error message that you end up Googling, and then you find out, oh, I've installed the wrong version. So do not install this version. It actually tells you in the instructions, you know, if I blow this up a little bit. So this is a you know, important. I wish this was blinking and in red. Don't do that one. Do the previous releases one, right? Use version 10x. So definitely read the instructions and follow the instructions. 10x is the one you want, and then I can grab one of the, you know, I'm on a Windows box, so I can grab the 64. I'm on a 64-bit Windows box, so I can grab the 64-bit version and then install that. So that's what that was looking at. And you click that and you run. I've already done it, so I won't do it again. But you click run. It takes a few minutes to run through all that stuff, and then installs Node.js. So after that, the next step is a code editor. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Visual Studio Code. There's Atom, there's WebStorm, there's Sublime, there's, you know, Notepad++. Just tons of, you know, if you have a favorite one, you're really familiar with that one, by all means. But I'm a big fan of Visual Studio Code. It's one Microsoft promotes. I'm a Microsoft guy, so that's the one I've installed. So that's what I have right here, Visual Studio Code. Doesn't take, it's very lightweight, doesn't take a lot. Not like its big brother Visual Studio, which actually it's gotten better lately, but it used to be that, man, installing that would take some time. And then we need our development toolchain prerequisites, right? So I need Gulp, I need Yeoman, and I need the Yeoman SharePoint generator. You can do them one at a time. There's the commands to install each one separately, or you can be brave and do all three at once. So there's the command line that I need. Now, if I hadn't installed Node.js, then I wouldn't have NPM. NPM, you can install NPM on its own. If you go and Google NPM, you'll find, hey, install NPM. But when you install Node.js, it installs NPM as part of Node.js. That's why when I drop to a command prompt here, and for the young kids who don't know what a command prompt is, sometimes I call it a DOS prompt. You know, just come here and you type CMD. There's your command prompt, right? So my command prompt, this is all, you know, DOS, disk operating system, DOS-based commands. And this one seems to have frozen on me. I'm not sure why, so we'll just open a fresh one. right? So there's my command prompt. I can do all sorts of text-based commands. I know a lot of my students that are not used to this kind of thing. They're all, what do I, I tell them, learn help. Help is helpful. You can actually type help on lots of different things, So help can save you. That's a one command CLS, clear the screen, that you got to start learning some of those commands. Well, the command we want here is npm. So npm is going to fire off the network packet manager and install additional tools for us. And so in our case, we need the npm gulp yo and the other. I'm going to make this a little bit just so I can do some zooming, because I like to zoom. So make this like this. How about like that? So there's our command, npm install gulp yo, the generator, do it everywhere. That's the global. Let that run. Now, I've already run this before too. I don't think it takes that long to rerun it, so I'll rerun it real quick. You can get the idea for what it does. So it's really just going out to the internet. It does require an internet connection. It's going out to the internet, and right now it's checking to see what I already have installed and then updating it if it needs to. But if I hadn't had anything installed, it would pull everything down and install it. And 99 times out of 100, this works. Sometimes I'll do something silly and get an error message. Like if I hadn't installed Node.js, it might say I don't recognize npm. So if you get any kind of weird error messages, look them up. Most people have run into them already and posted about them. Usually you can figure it out pretty easy, even though the error message usually has nothing to do with the actual problem is. All right, so we've done that step. And I think that's all of our, except for a modern browser. So yeah, it recommends using Edge or Google or Chrome or Firefox. That don't use IE 11, so that's dead, or it should be. And the last step is the self-signed developer certificate. So this is a one-time thing. We just need to do it once, and then we don't have to worry about it. And you do have to do it inside of a project. So I'm going to do that in a minute, right after we create our first first web part project. All right, so now we're ready. Let's go ahead and build our first website client-side web part. So what do we need to do? We set up our environment. We set up our virtual machine. We're going to make a directory. That's what MD is for our solution. So let's do that. Let's go and out to my command prompt. Spent a lot of time with this. Actually, make this big again because I'm gonna. There we go. We spent a lot of time in the command prompt with Visual Studio SharePoint Framework. So we're going to make a new, we'll call this one Hello World Philly. And I'm going to change directory to that. So now I'm just in an empty directory in my command prompt, and then I'm going to create the template for the Hello World web part. So this is analogous to if I was in Visual Studio and I said file new project and then it generates a bunch of code for me. I'm doing the same thing with this command. So yo at Microsoft /SharePoint. So yo at Microsoft /SharePoint. And that's going to generate. So I did that directory earlier and you just saw two little dots there. So there was nothing in there. This is going to walk me through a little several prompts to say what kind of product do you want to create, right? This is the SharePoint client-side solution generator. So what's the solution name? It's going to name it by default the same name as the directory I put it in. That sounds good to me. HW Philly, Hello World Philly. What do I want to support? So depending on what I choose here, I might want to support just SharePoint Online. I might want to have backwards compatibility with 2016, 2019, or I might just 2019. So depending on what I choose, it's going to have different sets of code to provide that backwards compatibility. We're going to keep it simple. We're just going to go with SharePoint Online. Where do I want to put it? I'm already in the folder I want to put it, so we'll do the current folder. That sounds good to me. Enter. What else? Do I want to allow the tenant? So when someone deploys this to their Office 365, there's a checkbox that will allow them to put it everywhere. Do I want to allow that, or for some reason does my web part want to be installed, one at a time. Maybe I'm selling this, maybe I want to control, I don't know, for whatever reason. I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to allow that. I'm going to let, even though the default's no, I'm going to allow the tenant to just put it everywhere all at once. The next question is, will the components in the solution require permissions to access web APIs that are unique and not shared with other components? So if you're doing a solution that has those kind of requirements, you might say yes to this. I'm going to say no to this at this time. We're keeping it really simple. Lastly, it says not lastly, we still have a couple more things. But what type of client-side component? Are we creating a web part? The other choices are you can create an extension, you can create a library. Again, keeping it simple, we're just going to choose a web part. The name is Hello World, sounds good. The description, Hello World description. Again, not trying to get too fancy here. What framework would we like to use? So here, even though I said Microsoft doesn't make you use a certain framework, there is support in this particular generator for React. So I could actually select React, and then it will generate the support files that will support React in my solution. Again, keeping it simple, I'm going to select no JavaScript framework. So now it's going to the business of actually creating all those files, the JSON files, the TypeScript files. There's a markup file, readme.md, everything that I need in my solution. Again, this is the same similar type of operation you would get in Visual Studio if you said file new project. It just does it a little more behind the scenes. Because I'm doing it in the command line, I get to see all the dirty laundry going on underneath. So that takes about a second. We'll give it another second or two to finish generating all this code. And once it does finish generating the code, you'll see in the directory. In fact, when it finishes, I'll show you some of the files that create it. We'll open it up in Visual Studio Code, take a look at the generated code, make maybe a change or two. Again, trying to keep it real simple, trying to stick to the instructions in the tutorial. Do I see any benefit to use the PNP generator? I'm gonna put a pin in that. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on that, but I'll short answer, yeah, sure. All right, we'll let that again. We'll sit there while this is coming. I'm going to just jump back over here to the instructions for a second. Let's see, and this again just walked you through everything that we just did. So if you're following along in the instructions, it gives you some screenshots, tells you what you're doing. And then at the end, you can preview your web part, even though you haven't made any changes, because it's all the code we need for a fully functional web part. And it talks about how to preview it using one command, the gulp serve command. So let's see, is it done doing its thing yet? Almost done. All right, we will, rather than wait for that, I'm going to jump out to one I did earlier. So let's open up another command prompt. What we have out there. So we've got one I did earlier just called Hello World -web part. So let's change directory to that one. I'll show you what's in that. It's the same thing. So this is some of those files that we talked about. You've got some JSON files, configuration files, gulp serve file. To open this up, to actually take it apart and start looking at it, I'll use code dot. That's going to open up Visual Studio Code to the current directory. The dot represents the current directory. So there we are. There's this particular one. And let's see, did the other one finish yet? As I'm still working on. All right, we'll leave that one. I'll leave that one like Martha Stewart. We'll leave that one in the oven. We'll look at this one. It's the same thing. But yeah, so I open up using code dot. I open up Visual Studio Code, and now I can go around through that directory and see the different things. There's some of the JSON with some of the configuration. There's the CSS. The TypeScript file with some of the TypeScript, and you can see I actually went around and started messing around just to show you TypeScript is JavaScript. So you can actually put, I put alert Dave was here just to mess things up, and I changed it to welcome to maybe Dave's SharePoint, whatever you want to call it. I'll go ahead and save that. So and there's a few other tutorials to really expand on this, to connect to different SharePoint lists and show data from the lists and make other REST calls and all that. We're keeping it really simple, just sticking with the basics, just to show you how to get this deployed. But you could do a lot more with this, obviously. So once we have this, then we can go back to our command line and look at it, right? And what did they say? They said gulp serve. Now here's where if you did the wrong version, it might throw an error message. But hopefully I got the right version this time. So this should bring up the local workbench. So the SharePoint Framework has something that's called a workbench. It's an emulation of SharePoint Online. So you see in my URL there, localhost for whatever / workbench. This represents, without having to actually have a tenant, I can go out there and test out my web part. So I could come in here to this test workbench. I can click the plus sign, and you can see right now it only has two. It's got this sort of, out of the box web part, and then the hello world that I just did. And there it is. It says Dave was here. Welcome to Dave's SharePoint. So that's me just testing out the workbench in the local host workbench. There's another version of this workbench online. So let me show you that. If I go out to one of my tenants, my Mad SharePoint tenant that we were playing with earlier, I can access that workbench with the same URL or similar URL. And I think, let's see, it does that. I believe it even tells us that in the it tells us in here somewhere. We pre-gulp serve. Oh, I skipped a step. So it does warn you in the tutorial to do the self-signed certificate. I didn't have to do it because I already had done it when I was trying this out before we started the talk. But if I hadn't done it, it would warn me. So make sure you don't skip the step where you self-sign your certificate. And let me just show you what that is. So it's just one command. Where is it at? All right, so you run this command, and that will install a certificate in your certificate store so that you can work with the workbench and it will trust the workbench. So make sure you don't skip that step. You'll know if you do, it'll throw an error message. All right, so after I did that, then I was able to run the gulp serve and look at the application locally. We did all that. And then the tutorial goes on to talk about, the actual code, the web part class and how you inherit from the web part class, different parameters that you pass, the web part render method, which actually, so what the heart of this is that it uses the render method to display some HTML. And by default, it's a bunch of, div tags with different parameters, just pull out different CSS styles. What else does it talk about? Web parse manifest. And then this is the part I want to talk about. If I want to look at my web part using the other workbench, the SharePoint Online workbench, I just need whatever my tenant is, _layouts workbench. So similar to what I just did locally, I just need this part of the URL. So let's take a look at that. Let's go over to our web page. This guy, and we'll say _layouts workbench. Did I get that right? Nope. Hang on. What was it? I just had it. .spx. What was I typing? Right? Come on. Let's get this. This is what I get for trying to type it out. Let's copy it so I get it right this time. There we go. So this is the online version of the workbench, very similar to the local version, except instead of local host, now I'm running online. But again, I can come in here now because it's online. It's going to have more web parts, so not just that text web part, but some of the other web parts. And that way, I could if I wanted to get like a look and feel, I could actually add some of these other web parts. That's why I might want to use online versus local. I got the one I just did, and then I could add a few more. Some of the other ones and see how mine might, look. I could do the different columns. I could add other web parts and kind of see what mine looks like with other web parts. All right. So there's the online version of the workbench. There's the local version of the workbench. That's, in a nutshell, how to get your web part started, how to generate the code. You've got all the dependencies and just get it up and running. So the next step is how do you get that deployed, right? Now, there's a step that I skipped, this connect your web part. This is step 2 in this 4-part tutorial. That walks you through actually accessing a list, creating mocks, and doing all that. We're going to skip all that. This is a 50-minute talk, so we don't have time to go through all that, but definitely take a look at that. We're going to skip right over to deploy your part to a web page. So we've done the part where we've created the web part and we served it up and we made a few changes and we've seen it and we like it. Now we want to package it up and make it ready for prime time, right? So the first thing we have to do is make sure that we have an app catalog. So if I go to my tenant, my SharePoint tenant there, I have to have global admin privileges, and if you're using your own Office 365 developer tenant, you will be automatically global admin. And under the SharePoint Admin Center, so I clicked on my little gears here, I went to admin, and then after I clicked admin, I clicked SharePoint admin. You'll see that there's under more features, there's different, term store, user profiles, search. The one I want is apps. When I go to apps, the very first time you do this, it's going to say, hey, do you want to create an app catalog? You step through that wizard, and then you have an app catalog. And I've got a couple of screenshots here from a blog post, the SharePoint Diary. So shout out to SharePoint Diary. This is what it looks like the very first time. When you log in, you're going to get, hey, there is no app catalog for your tenant. Do you want to create one? So you'll say yes, go create one, and then you provide the web address, the name, language, time zone, administrator, quota, all that usual stuff when you create a new site, and then it creates that app catalog as one of your sites in all of your sites. So it's pretty straightforward to create the app catalog. Once you have that app catalog, you can go back to it and see any apps that have been deployed to your tenant. So this is the app catalog, and it's more than just apps for SharePoint Office. You'll see if someone requests an app, if your tenant's configured that people can request an app, then you might have requests in there to load different apps. But these are the apps that I've loaded in this particular tenant. You can see I've got the Hello World web part I just did. I did earlier one a while ago, a couple months ago. I did the Smithsonian Institution Modern Script Editor web part. And then these are just some other demos. But this is, if I want to load my web part, here's where I would upload it. I click on upload. I'd find where my web part is located. I've got to find the SPPKG package. That is what is the artifact that gets deployed. If I'm working in a situation where I'm working with another administrator, this is the file I'd have to give them. That's what they're going to have to upload to deploy it to the. Now, how do I get that file? The way you get that file, we go back to our instructions here, is tells you you've got to package it up, right? So we have to build our web part. So we come down here, and it's just a couple commands here. After we've done all that part, where we've built it up and tested it out, and we like it. What we want to do is we want to package it up. So let's see, we skip through all that. We skip through step 2. And on step 3, we play around with deploying it. This is the command to package our solution, right? That's going to create that package. And before I do that, I've actually got to stop running gulp serve. So let's do that and go over here. I'm going to Control-C, turn off gulp serve, and then I'm going to package my solution. And again, if I hadn't run this, I wouldn't have that SP package file. This is going to go and create it, make sure everything is in there. In fact, what this does, if I look at this in Explorer, it creates this solution directory. Where is my solution directory? SharePoint solution. And then you'll see there's the file that gets created. There's a debug directory this is everything that's in that file. In fact, if I look at that file, this is really just a zip file. I did this earlier. You can copy and you can paste it, rename it to .zip, and then you can if you want to see what's inside. Now double click on it and you can see it's just everything that's in that debug folder. So your config file, all your client-side access, your app manifest, all that good stuff. So once you have that SPP file, I can go and use that to deploy to my app catalog. So let me go back to my app catalog and upload, browse, paste that out there, open. There's my SPP new version. Okay. And if I've already deployed it, it's going to ask me to update it, which I did. there's that check mark. I want to deploy it everywhere. So I'm going to say yes, deploy, and now it's available to all of my sites in my Mad SharePoint Office 365 tenant. So how do I use that? I go to my main page here. I did this earlier, but again, I would just edit the page, and it should show up as part of my web parts when I'm inserting any old web part, right? So I'll come in here and I'm going to say, hey, I want to insert a web part. I guess the trickiest part, and I believe this is you can have in Office 365 Online, you can have the classic experience or the modern experience. This is the classic experience. So it sort of looks like if you're used to 2019 or 2016 or 2013. In the classic experience, it's going to be under the category Other. So be careful that you're not looking under Custom, because in the old web parts, would be, and I've done a few old web parts here. They were used to always be put under Custom. If you haven't changed, if you accepted all the defaults, the default category is Other. There's that new SharePoint Framework web part that I just added. Now I can add it there, and load it and run it. Give it a second to pop up, and then it should pop up. Save that. And it's thinking. I think I pushed it too hard, but that is how you would get that thing deployed. And let's wrap this sucker up. There it is. Okay. So running it. We walked over setting up your environment, installing all the defaults. We talked about how to sign up for the Office 365 developer tenant, create that app catalog, how to upload the package, creating the new project, making the directory, walking through the wizard, previewing the web part, running the galt serve. The step 2 talks about defining the list model, actually retrieving data from the list, adding styles. So definitely, if you want to go through this yourself, go through the tutorial, walk through all of step 2, and then at the end, you can deploy it. There is a step I skipped when deploying it, where you actually change it from being hosted from localhost to being hosted from a content developer network. So make sure you don't skip that step. But then once you do that, you can deploy it to Office 365 and test it out on your web pages. So that's it in a nutshell. Just trying to get you started, pointing you to where everything's at. There's a bunch of different resources. Microsoft SharePoint Developer.com, developer.microsoft.com/SharePoint, aka MS SharePoint Framework has a lot of more details. As I mentioned, as you go through the slide deck when I put it up there, all the links are on every slide. So if you want to go into any more detail on any of the things I stepped on, just click on the slide in question and just bring you up to the Microsoft Learn link. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you got a nugget or two of information out of this. If you have questions, you can always tweet me on Twitter at David E. Patrick. If you're looking for a position, tinyurl.com/DSA-job, and feel free to stop by our Mad SharePoint user group meetings every month. Our virtual meetings are happening, once a month, and we'd love to have you. So thanks again. If you have questions, we got just a couple minutes left. Feel free to put them out in the chat. If not, thanks again, and have a great rest of the conference.